welcome. We are back, episode 35, almost nearing middle age in terms of episodes. Meaningful Times with Friends, Merely Jason, The Nathan Nation, Spoolie D. I am Mean Dave. Welcome back. In usual Meaningful Times with Friends fashion, let's get our sorries in. Anybody sorry about anything this week?
I am.
Ooh, we got a rare Merely Jason apology. What's up, Jay?
I prefer not to be wrong about things, and I absolutely hate being wrong on the internet. So I'd like to apologize for being wrong. I completely invented a connection between Halloween 3 and the rest of the Halloween series, misremembering there being a commercial for Halloween on the TV screen in the gas station. At some point, I must have seen that in some other movie, and it just kind of like transposed itself onto Halloween 3. I kind of adjusted my viewpoint over a period of about a week. And then I finally sat down and watched Halloween 3 again last night just to see what the hell actually happened. And none of that was in there at all. I just completely hallucinated memory.
Made it up.
Yeah. Sorry.
So there is no connection between Halloween 3 and...
None whatsoever. It was my mistake. The only connection is the soundtrack was composed by John Carpenter.
I feel like I'm going to have to go full QAnon and do my own research and find this out for myself.
I recommend it.
I remember there being something like that in there, but I guess if you just saw it most recently and were watching it with a fine-tooth comb, maybe you're right.
Well, maybe, I don't know. I could have missed something. I was on the floor like half asleep, so.
Apology accepted. It was an honest mistake. Maybe next time stick to the fucking topic. I don't know. Maybe that'll help. Any other apologies? I think we're all good, right?
I think we all learned our lesson from Jason's apology.
Yeah, watch it.
Guys.
Keep a tight wagon. Yeah, all right.
Knowing is half the battle or something.
All right, moving along. In our next topic here, we're going to be talking about movies, which means we're probably going to start it off with personal experiences, knowing the way that this show fucking goes. We've been having some discussions in our chat over movies that were popular in the 80s. These are primarily 80s movies. One of the current trends on social media and whatnot is to take down these movies or try to remind people like, whoa, this is a bit problematic. Looking at movies through the current culture's filter. There's so many movies of this variety that we decided, hey, why don't we each pick a movie that is deemed problematic or might be considered problematic if people fucking remembered it. So this is problematic movies of the 80s. Jason's movie is Weird Science. Nathan's movie is Revenge of the Nerds. My movie is Just One of the Guys. And kicking it off will be Spoolie D's movie, and that is Soul Man.
Thanks, Dave. As soon as Dave mentioned this topic, I immediately texted everyone and said, I have dibs on Soul Man. Because this is the epitome of something that did not age well. In fact, when it came out, I was like, are you serious? They really made this movie? The plot basically is this guy gets into Harvard Law. He's a wealthy, rich kid. And his dad, to teach him a lesson about responsibility, says, I'm not going to pay for your college. I'm going to just use this to teach you a lesson and then go to Barbados. So he's already a spoiled rich kid. Sorry, spoiled rich white kid. This is important to the plot. So then he goes to get a loan. And they're like, dude, you've like missed payments. Like you've bounced 16 checks. So not only is he like a rich white kid, but he's also not very responsible with money. So he's just doing everything he can to figure out how to get into college. And he finds a black scholarship that'll pay his entire tuition to Harvard. And I guess some weird plot point, they're like, oh, nobody was eligible for it, so I guess it's okay. And then to pass as a black student, he intentionally overdoses on experimental tanning pills made by his pothead burnout friend that is awkwardly introduced to the plot in this weird party scene he's never heard from again. But that's just a source of tanning pills, which I don't think is an actual product. And I don't know why tanning pills. I don't know, but it made his skin dark, as you can see over Dave's head. You cannot see in Dave's head is how grotesquely red his mouth was. It didn't even seem like they colored his lips with lipstick. It looks like they also colored the inside of his mouth. So there's this really just almost vaginal quality to his mouth. At the risk of upsetting Dave, this is not a good movie. It starts out kind of okay in terms of just like a wacky 80s, and then it introduces every horrible like movie trope that you could possibly imagine. All of a sudden, it's all fun and games, right? And even he's got this woman who's into him only because she sees herself as like super woke back in the 80s, and so she's only having sex with him because he's black. And of course, she's got the stereotypical dad who was super, super racist, played by the super, super racist Leslie Nielsen. He's not really racist. It culminates in one of the cringiest scenes of a very, very cringy movie. I mean, it just starts like this dinner. I don't want to go into that dinner scene. It doesn't matter. But here, the movie itself is a piece of shit for this reason, right? It's a predictable arc. He starts out everything. He starts seeing the downside of being black and starts like getting kind of depressed. Plot device used in like every episode of Three's Company, or different like lies culminating together, where he's got like the woman in the room who wants to got Ray Don Chong. Yeah. Her in the living room and his white parents in the kitchen. And it's just this really long, drawn-out scene where he keeps trying to go from room to room to room. He's trying to hide from his parents that he's black. He's trying to hide from Ray Don Chan that he's got this other woman. And the only good part of the movie happens, the Beach Boys start playing in his bedroom because the woman who's trying to fuck him starts playing the Beach Boys. And then he's like, that's my automatic stereo alarm clock. I figured like this terrible music would get me out of bed. Isn't that smart? That's like probably the only thing in the movie that I agree with is the Beach Boys suck. Then it goes into this like long fucking path of redemption. I gotta say something about also James Earl Jones did not fucking mail this in. If there was ever a time for that man to mail in a performance, it was this piece of shit. But he fucking like nailed this part. He, like facial expressions, voice, he's perfect. The man is perfect, or was. He somehow, even though he fucking went in blackface, stole a scholarship, which in the beginning of the movie was from nobody, and then it turns out it was from Ray Dong Chong. Again, that makes no sense. But because James Earl Jones says, you know, you have learned something that I couldn't teach any of my students. You learned how it felt to be black. And the C. Thomas Howell character says, no, sir, because if I didn't like it, I could always get out of it. So I didn't really learn. He's like, you've learned more than I thought. And it's like, dude, even then, he would have been prosecuted, expelled, and he would have ended up like Rachel Dolezal on OnlyFans, otherwise unable to get work. I really wanted to try and find some redeeming qualities about it just to make the conversation more interesting. I'm not even talking about it being offensive. It's just fucking implausible. Like the entire plot from beginning to end is ridiculous. And the fact that people let him get away with it is ridiculous. Like, has nothing to do with being woke or anything. It's just one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life. Back to you, Dave.
It was a hit, though. 4.5 million budget, and it made 35 million. So, you know, and that's in 80s dollars.
Does that mean we used to live in a more tolerant society than we do now?
Probably. You mentioned that it didn't make any sense about the scholarship. The scholarship was available to people in California, and if no one claimed it, it then opened up to other applicants. That was how Ray Don Chong was waiting to get it, because she already knew that there were no applicants in California for it, and therefore was the next in line to get it. You said it made no sense. And
it didn't, but that makes sense. Clearly, I need to rewatch it.
Now,
I'll come back next episode with a fully better report on the movie.
It's fine. Your first report's fine. I did rewatch it. I didn't think it was any better or worse than I remembered it, aside from the premise. The one part that was comedic that I texted the guys about, it's the most problematic scene. It's the one I didn't want to mention, but the dinner scene when he has dinner with the girl who's taking an interest in him because he's black. Her name's Melora Hardin. There's a lot of actors in this movie that have gone on to career success, which makes me think this was like the Deal with the Devil movie they had to do in order to have careers later. I mean, you can see Julia Louis-Dreyfus is right there. Melora Hardin her name is now Melora Diane Hardin Jackson. She's married to a dude who's named Jackson, and he's a white Jackson. So, kind of funny there. But no, the dinner scene, the dinner is with the father, the mother, and the brother of Melora Hardin's character, and they each have a fantasy sequence where they're picturing their stereotype of him. It's the most cringiest scene because you have C. Thomas Howell in blackface performing black stereotypes, and I remember thinking it was funny back then, and as terrible as it is, it still made me laugh. I don't know if it was because of how terrible it was, but C. Thomas really brought the acting to those scenes.
I don't know. The little brother imagining him as Prince is probably the least offensive of those
Probably.
three little vignettes, maybe? I don't know.
Unless you're a
That was the
Prince
most
fan.
offensive to me.
Yeah, unless you're a Prince fan, or it's arguable. But it made me laugh when the mother pictures him as
That was the best one.
as the sex star slave or whatever.
The fucking knife in his mouth.
Yeah, the knife in his mouth, and he's ready, ready to rip off her top, and she's like, "Oh," like she's into it. And then it started with that, and then it goes to the Prince fantasy sequence, and then last is Leslie Nielsen picturing him as a pimp, telling a pregnant Melora Hardin to go in the kitchen and get him some food. Of course, a watermelon reference. He then takes notice of Leslie Nielsen's like, "What the fuck you looking at?" or something like that.
He was actually eating watermelon while telling the pregnant, whatever her name is, to go get him his heroin needles, you fat white slut.
See, Thomas Howell, as offensive as it was, he didn't phone it in either. Another actor that popped up in this movie who's gone on to success, Wallace Langham. He was in Larry Sanders' show, and he had an interesting role playing Peter Thiel in The Social Network. Wallace Langham and another actor no one knows. The two white guys in Harvard who spend 24/7 walking around Harvard just telling racist black jokes to each other. Well, it's really Wallace Langham telling his buddy, like everywhere, they're in the library, they're in the courtyard, they're in the cafeteria, and everywhere you encounter them, they're just nonstop racist black jokes. That's all they do.
Another completely preposterous part of that movie is when he finally hits those guys.
Yeah.
He hits them with like a fucking like Superman level like punch.
Oh,
They
yeah.
fly like across the cafeteria through tables.
Well, he had black strength on his side. That's probably why. Merely, Jason?
There's not a whole lot left for me to add, except I didn't rewatch it because I watched it a lot when I was younger because it was so insane to me that they would make such a movie. It was kind of like a train wreck thing. And plus I was in love with, well, figuratively speaking, in love with James Earl Jones. Like I really not like was like sexually attracted to him, but I really loved him as an actor and I always thought he was great. So I'd watch anything with him in it. That movie, man, like I still can't believe it got made. You know what I mean? Like it makes sense because, you know, in the 80s, there was certainly less awareness of how gross that would look. But at the same time, they were trying to point out that, you know, well, no, this is actually not such a good thing. It's a bad movie with a bad premise, but it's absolutely insane that it exists. And so kind of worth watching for that and that alone, you know, if you're not the type to get terribly offended by it. It's really a bonkers premise. I don't know.
I didn't say it was a good movie or a bad movie. It's telling an effective story. In spite of its bonkers premise, it does stay true to the mistake that's being made, the consequences of that mistake, albeit it's fairly, you know, schmaltzed and all that. What sells it really well were the performances of Ray Dawn Chong. I can't imagine being black and acting in this movie on any earnest level, and she did, and, you know, I can only imagine how much work really you get in that point in time. But
She was in a lot of movies back then.
I remember The Squeeze she was in. That was that forgotten Michael Keaton movie.
She was in Commando.
Yeah, her name being in it kind of was, you know, part of a package deal. And, of course, James Earl Jones. What's funny is he's playing the professor that's not tolerating fools the whole time. I almost feel like he was probably channeling his personal thoughts on the film itself through that character, almost making you feel intimidated for even having the nerve to watch the movie itself. So in terms of storytelling, it was an effective movie. Again, Jason watched it a bunch back in the day. I just watched it now, and I'm like, I think the movie would have definitely aged better if they had the foresight to think, you know what, probably not a good idea to do it with a white person doing blackface. Maybe if we took a black person and if we put them in whiteface to play the white character, and then they were their real black self in the role of the tanning pills, kind of inverse it, and that almost would have made the movie a little more interesting too. But, you know, Nathan, Nation, thoughts?
I've seen this movie a bunch of times. I distinctly remember watching this movie with my dad as a kid, and considering when it came out, I think I was 11 years old, I just have zero memory of having critical thought about this movie. I just accepted it at face value without having sort of that internet way of looking at things where this is so fucking offensive and how could they? It was 1986. I didn't give a fuck. Fast forward to now, I would definitely look at it with a different eye, but I don't remember as an 11-year-old approaching this in a way that made me feel like there was something wrong going on here. The parts where they're at dinner, I thought were the funniest part of the entire movie. Yeah. Didn't offend me. I'm sorry. I was 11. So what you were just saying, how they should have probably cast a black character,
A black
actor. This was the 80s. Were they really going to cast a black person as the main character of the movie unless he was Eddie Murphy? Probably not. So
literally did that skit where he was a white guy.
They could have done it. Who knows? Maybe
that would have been awesome as a continuation into this, for sure.
Who knows? Maybe it was even pitched to him. You never know. I mean,
in that Saturday Night Live sketch, he looked just as bad as a white guy as C. Thomas Howell looked as a black guy in this movie.
Totally.
So
more tolerant times.
Yeah, for sure.
If it weren't for Soul Man, would we have gotten white chicks? You know? I think white chicks is fucking hilarious. I think the Wayans bros look absolutely insane and freakish and horrifying. But that movie's really fucking funny, and Terry Crews is absolutely insanely great in that.
Yeah, one of the movies that helped make Terry Crews. So
Terry Crews is great in everything. He was even good in that really shitty, like, 7th time recycled Adam Sandler, Drew Barrymore movie where they went to Africa.
There's one scene that killed me. He's got no skills. They roll up on him playing basketball, and the singing group just starts making fun of him, like just bagging on him for having no skills at basketball. It was great. So Soul Man, that one out of the way. All right, let's move on to the next in line. We have Revenge of the Nerds, courtesy of the Nathan Nation.
Okay. Probably one of my favorite movies of the 80s, if not of all time. I've been forced to sort of re-examine my love of this movie based on how people feel about it nowadays. But becoming an old, stubborn man, I still like this movie, and I'm bummed. I wish I had, years ago, bought a copy of it on DVD or something, because it's nowhere to be found streaming anymore. It has been taken away from us in terms of streaming services. Even on YouTube, I don't see it anywhere. I'm not going to break down the entire plot, but basically 2 nerds, Gilbert and Lewis, go off to college. I think it's called Adams College. They're immediately ostracized socially. They can't find housing. They can't get into a fraternity because they're nerds. They end up joining up with a bunch of guys to get a house. And in this movie, there's a pretty loose interpretation of what a nerd is. So a nerd is anyone who is into computers, or a minority, or gay, or a stoner. Like, nerds are anyone who are not like a jock white guy. This movie at the time to me seemed pretty subversive, because it had like a lot of things as like a little kid that blew my mind, like wonder joints and titties and full frontal nudity and pies with naked women inside of them, and just like it had all this insane shit in it. And specifically the 2 scenes that have, I think, made this movie essentially be disappeared from the internet would be, there's a scene where the nerds break into a sorority house and install cameras and watch women walk around the house naked and take photos of them and later use them in a pie that they sell, like a kissing contest thing. The second scene that I think is probably mostly why this movie is banned is there's a scene where Lewis grabs a costume and impersonates the main jock and has sex with the main female lead of the movie under the auspices that he's this big jock guy. And when he takes the mask off and reveals who he is, she goes, "Oh my God, you're that nerd, but you were wonderful," kind of thing. And so I think those are probably the 2 most frequently cited reasons why this movie is deemed unacceptable now. I don't know. Like, I haven't watched this movie in probably 10 years. I would be curious to rewatch it from the perspective how it's seen now to see if that would change my opinion of it. Yeah, it's pretty much all I have to say. So throw it to you guys.
Well, I think I just found it in Spanish.
Okay. Dubbed in Spanish?
Sí, yeah. That's in Spanish.
Me amo es booger.
La venganza de los nerds. Found it in Spanish on YouTube. Spoolie, what are your thoughts on Revenge of the Nerds?
It's kind of like an inexplicable star-studded cast. It's like, why did Anthony Edwards make it big? And I've always marveled at the fucking career of Timothy Busfield. Like, who the fuck looks at that guy's face and goes like, yeah, he was in everything. He was in fucking, wasn't there a show called 30-something where he was like kind of the main guy? He was in Field of Dreams.
Oh, that was the red-haired guy.
Yeah, with the red beard.
Yeah, he was a thing in the 80s and 90s, yeah.
And then Anthony Edwards, another fucking like huge career with ER and everything. But again, just like some fucking guy with a 9-foot forehead. Mm-hmm. Curtis Armstrong, the guy who played Booger, like wore the shit out of that shtick. You know, he was obviously in Better Off Dead. And then he was in fucking Moonlighting.
Yep.
They're like, what does this show need for a kick? And they brought Booger in. It's just wild. The Ted McGinley, obviously. That was the Stan character, I think, the main jock.
John Goodman's in it. He's the coach. He's the football.
Oh, that's right. Like wildly successful people in this movie. The part I like best was the Olympic scene where they had to have the homosexual ergonomically modified javelin. Again, I don't get offended like by anything, but that is so fucking preposterous. It's just the funniest thing in the entire movie, not because like
wrist?
yeah, he's gonna it's just like, oh my god.
I'll tell you what, speaking as a gay guy, I still find that fucking funny.
It's fucking funny.
It's so preposterous.
Lamar was great. The whole performance was great. Everything about it was great. It's still fucking funny.
I heard an interview with the actor who played Adam Sandler's sidekick in yet another Adam Sandler Drew Barrymore movie, the one that was set in the 80s, The Wedding Singer.
Alan Covert, probably.
Yeah. He was saying he's pretty sure that jacket he had, the Michael Jackson jacket, was the Lamar Luttrell vest from the other movie with the sleeves sewn on them.
Yeah.
I do remember this is the first time I watched like a woman take her top off in front of my mom, and she like tried to cover my eyes, and then her sister, my Aunt Flo, it's like, he's gonna see it at some point. Like, leave him alone.
I love how Spoolie has a real Aunt Flo.
I do. Florence.
How often did she visit?
Good one. That's professional comedy for you folks. No, I do have an Aunt Flo who's 100% Japanese who, for some reason, lived most of her life in Oklahoma. She left Hawaii and settled in Oklahoma, and she's still there to this day. Very strange.
Word.
Anyways, and the music scene. Again, like, if nerds, like, made music, it would be that. It's like, it has all these weird hypotheses. It's like, if a nerd got laid with a hot chick, this is what would have happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that logic, too, that he applies where it's like, well, we spend all of our time thinking about sex since we're not worrying about sports. Again, another movie that made very little sense.
Word. The main character is Robert Carradine.
He's like a lesser-known Carradine, right?
Yeah, there's all these Carradines running around, and Robert's one of them. And Robert, he was mostly known for this role, but he's peppered throughout a lot of different movies. Most recently, funny to find out because I saw his name in the credits, he's in Django Unchained. He plays one of the slack-jawed gang that works on Candyland. And then another one that you neglected to mention was James Cromwell. He plays Robert Carradine's father, and James Cromwell's gone on to be in everything from Babe, That'll Do Pig, to L.A. Confidential. He's been in a lot of shit. I think he's still alive, too. I think he's still acting and shit. Or maybe he's dead. I don't know. Let's look that up, too. Jason?
We loved this movie as children. My cousins and my friends, everybody, all of us. If it was on TV, we were watching it. It's good. It's good. It's good. It's a good movie.
I would say giving a thumbs up. James Cromwell's still alive. Still kicking.
Sweet. It's important to remember, and I don't think a lot of people think of it this way these days, but I think it's important to remember the context of where things come from. Unless it's like, really egregious, it's kind of unfair to apply contemporary morals to previous actions. You know what I mean? I guess if you're coming to it for the first time now, as opposed to having been around when it was first came out, I could see people getting upset or offended by Revenge of the Nerds. But I mean, it's just a silly movie. It doesn't have to make sense or hang together in any way. It's just like a series of excuses for jokes to happen. And sometimes the jokes are about effeminate gay guys, but they did it so well that it was like the platonic ideal of a fag joke, And I don't know. It's a good movie. It's funny. And when it came out, all of that made sense. It all made perfect sense. It was all, of course, we're going to have boobs and bush and panty raids and cameras and corridors and shit like that. I mean, look at Porky's. I mean, Porky's had an actual penis. Well, not a real penis, I'm assuming. An actual penis being yanked through a glory hole.
Yeah.
In the context of the time, this movie was fine. It made perfect sense.
When I saw Revenge of the Nerds young, it was in the wave of these movies that revolved around incredible horniness of the 80s. Like sex's holy grail importance in one's life. And I don't remember when exactly I saw Revenge of the Nerds. I thought it was okay. It was one of these movies I didn't relate terribly much to because, albeit me being horny, I never thought it was that funny to make it like a driving force of a film. Because there was this movie you mentioned, Porky's. There were also a series of movies that were lesser known, but still, kind of part of it. I didn't even see one of them until way later, Losing It. That was one with Tom Cruise and Jackie Earl Haley. And I remember just in the premise alone of these movies where some character is like so incredibly horny. I mean, real rapist energy in the comedic performance of the horniness of whatever character it was. But Revenge of the Nerds was one of those movies that I remember thinking just like is kind of crass, I guess, in terms of being so obsessed with, you know, Bush. That was like, I mean, when I remember when they kept talking about Bush, I'm like, do they mean pubes or pubic hair? Like, that's real. They're obsessed with the hair. Hair sucks. You know, yeah, you see boobs. I thought that was great. That was wonderful, but it felt seedier. I never was all that into it. I actually leaned more towards Revenge of the Nerds 2. That was a PG-13 movie. Granted, I didn't see boobs in it, but it had a lot more of what the underlying theme of Revenge of the Nerds is: misfits banding together to overcome the odds, the powers that be, which were primarily the jocks, the confident, whatever. And then the irony being that we live in a time now where the nerds are the ones in power. I remember when I first saw, I mentioned it again, the movie Social Network, and I remember thinking, this is the actual Revenge of the Nerds through the lens of Fight Club. This is David Fincher's Revenge of the Nerds, and they have won. The nerds are the ones who have taken over, and they're just as bad as the jocks, because as the Stanford Prison Experiment and everything Philip Zimbardo, his studies on the Lucifer, it doesn't matter who's in power. As soon as people are in power, it corrupts them, just kind of doing the same shit that anybody does. No one's really above the roles of the powerful and the oppressed. So, Revenge of the Nerds, yeah, yay, glad they got their dicks wet. Good for them. Didn't relate to it all that much. And again, I was more of a Revenge of the Nerds 2 guy, because I also love Courtney Thorne-Smith. Had a big crush on her from summer school, and she plays the love interest in that movie. So, and then years later, I got to meet Barry Sobel, comedian and actor of Revenge of the Nerds 2, and I regret meeting him. He sucks. Moving along, Jason, his pick. This is our John Hughes entry into the problematic movies of the 80s with Weird Science.
Yeah, so Weird Science is about two guys who use their computer to create the perfect woman who will be their slave and do whatever they ask her to do. And somehow they think that this might work, and then they try it, and then it works, which is kind of wild, considering the way they go about creating this woman is inputting data, basically like scanning photographs of like hot chicks and Einstein, oddly enough, tapping into like the CIA's computers or something because they need more power. And then they hook like jumper cables up to a Barbie doll and hit enter. And somehow this all comes together to create the perfect woman. So she comes out wearing her panties and like a kind of cut off like top or whatever. And she's just ready to go. She's like, what do you little maniacs want to do first? And then they just proceed to have like the night of their lives. Somehow she's able to do anything. So they suddenly have money, they have cars. She's got supernatural powers. There's a lot of problematic stuff, obviously, by today's standards. There's two teenage boys who are with an adult woman who's willing to have sex with them. They don't actually end up having sex with her. But just by virtue of her kind of being in their circle, they become magically cool to other people and get whatever they want. The girls that they were lusting after, who they steal from some bullies that always fuck with them and call them faggots and whatever. The obvious stuff, which is, adult woman pulling guns on kids' parents and then making them forget that it ever happened, zapping the brains of the grandparents so that they are comatose in a closet. These are not such good things. But I think the thing that really is worth pointing out, and Revenge of the Nerds had this too, a lot of movies have, and Soul Man, they have this whole like trope of black people are scary. You saw it in Adventures in Babysitting as well. So they go to a club and immediately it's like, record scratch, everybody turns around like, who are these white kids or whatever. But by the end of the night, they're drinking and getting drunk, and then suddenly they lapse into this all but the blackface impression of black people, and it's really embarrassing and terrible. And I think that's really where the movie crosses the line into being somewhat offensive. I don't know. It's kind of unfortunate. But I still think it's a funny movie. I don't know.
It's still on mainstream streaming.
I watched it just like a couple of months ago.
Yeah, it's on like Paramount and all that. So out of all of these movies, it probably has the most mainstream acceptability. When you selected it, I'm like, well, this hasn't really come under attack of all of its, kind of problematic elements. They still think it's cute.
I actually did look it up because I was kind of curious to see if there were a lot of negative sentiments about it online. And there are a million think piece articles about how Weird Science is really problematic and so on. And most of it, I think, is really lame. But the thing that I agree with is the really unfortunate shtick where Anthony Michael Hall is like doing full like jive talk for a good amount of time.
You'll be hard pressed to find a movie in the 80s that was a comedy that didn't have some problematic element of it by today's standards or by their standards at the time, because that's kind of what a lot of people say is the point of comedies, take the piss out of a lot of things. When I was trying to find my movie, because I was originally going to select Secret Admirer. That's another C. Thomas Howell movie. It's a movie that has, a lot of adults with teenagers in relationships, and then also there's always like, we're seeing titties of teenagers in some of these movies. Weird Science didn't have any titties. It had digital titties, had implications of titties, but no actual titties.
Bras on heads.
Bras on heads. In all of its offensiveness, there was still an innocence to it. Even in the jive talking scene, Anthony Michael Hall's drunk and he's doing his kind of over the top shit. So I'm not saying it's good or whatever. I'm saying more or less maybe they see that as being, forgivable or whatever. We don't see anything wrong. People love the movie Airplane still. It's still celebrated. White and black folks love the scene with, what's her name?
Barbara Billingsley.
Barbara Billingsley, jive talking, because it's so silly. They work together to make that scene. Some of the movies that I had in mind, Wildcats. Goldie Hawn was in a string of these 80s movies that I loved. She's the white savior with the black team in Detroit, and there's a lot of humor derived from there. Overboard, another Goldie Hawn movie where she's fucking knocked out and they gaslight her into thinking that she's Kurt Russell's wife and mother of his kids and get her to do a bunch of shit. And then the other movies are just Animal House, Police Academy, Easy Money, just kind of like real guy-heavy kind of angled movies and whatnot. But Weird Science seems to transcend that. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're teenage boys. Some of the humor comes from that, like kind of lampooning that adolescent fantasy, because we have the Chet. One of the biggest key pieces of humor in that movie is Chet, who is the overly aggressive, overly, toxic male character. And he's just, down their necks the whole fucking time. And in the end, he's then, used as the butt of a joke to be a pile of fucking shit creature or whatever. And so I think there's something to that angle of why the movie still kind of holds up in some respect.
It's funny when Jason mentioned that she was this adult woman hanging out with these two teenage boys in this movie. That never occurred to me.
Technically, she's a Barbie doll.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
She's not a real woman.
I always viewed her as being a creation, like a mythical thing. So the dynamic of her age versus theirs never occurred to me. I've watched this movie a million times and I've always loved it. And it's only recently that I've watched it where the scene where they're in the bar bothered me, actually, more so than a lot of the elements in these other movies with his whole description of how he had a crush on some woman, this big titty bitch. It did bug me. Like, this is another movie that has elements of this. I rewatched True Romance recently. Yeah. And I remember when that came out, people being like, oh my God, Gary Oldman, doesn't he sound like a black guy? What the fuck? I rewatched it. It's horrible. He sounds lame as fuck. He sounds like a British guy, barely doing a good job at sounding like a black guy. And that bugged me more than this fucking movie. I don't know. So, Weird Science, thumbs up. True Romance, thumbs down.
Just that scene. You didn't like that scene. I like True Romance still.
Yeah, but Gary Oldman's character is lame as fuck.
Yeah, he gets killed. He gets shot in the fucking dick, dude. All right? So
yeah.
I think he got what was coming to him. You didn't see Anthony Michael Hall get shot in the dick in Weird Science, and he deserved it.
It ain't White Boy Day. Yeah.
Yeah, it ain't White Boy Day. So, Spoolie D, thoughts on Weird Science?
First of all, if you've never seen the Key and Peele skit, Shot in the Dick, you're missing out. The one thing about like the scene that Jason brought up being problematic, in zero instances are they trying to make a white person talking like a black person actually make them look cool. I understand why people would think it's offensive, but at the same time, he does, in context of the time, look like a complete fool for trying to do it. Like, it's never been cool to do that. I said Dave's example of Barbara Billingsley in Airplane is probably the only example just because it's so over, it's like meta. It's making fun of that, which is brilliant. But he looked like an idiot. So I don't think that's really offensive unless you're really digging for something to get offended by, which is a lot of the case. But I never really loved it. I've seen it, I don't know, like most of you, I've probably seen it like 7 times. Like the rest of the movies we're talking about has another thread through it where a completely preposterous plot. Another like trope during the 80s, we've talked about Superman 3, but it's like someone gets near a computer and like all sorts of like supernatural magical shit happens because someone has a computer. That's another weird like 80s movie trope where you have a computer and all of a sudden you're quote unquote computer whiz. War Games, another one. The only other thing that this reminds me of is that stupid Pantene ad campaign with Kelly LeBrock. Don't hate me because I'm beautiful. Talk about milking the shit out of a straw man. It's like nobody hated Kelly LeBrock because she's beautiful. I don't think anyone hated Kelly LeBrock at all. The movie's, I don't remember it being funny. I don't remember it being like interesting. I just remember it being kind of implausible. And then Chet, they turned through the magic of computers. I think they turned Chet into some sort of weird like Shrek looking character. It was like almost like proto Shrek.
She did. She had the magic ability to do that. So
maybe that's why they hated her, because she fucking turned Chet into Shrek.
Well, he deserved it, man. He was an asshole. You know?
He knew she would go on to date Steven Seagal or something.
Hey, she wasn't hard to kill, man.
She ended up regretting that. What's funny is she came back on Celebrity Fit Club, and you guys know my taste, man. She didn't need it. She looked great with some curves on her, and I was glad to see her on that show. And yeah, all Kelly LeBrock later years. So I think we got it all with Weird Science. All right, last but not least, my movie. This one was a movie that I forgot how much I liked this movie, then how many times I watched it. We had it dubbed on a VHS cassette, and that was Just One of the Guys. Lost but still remembered 80s classic that didn't have really much of a theater run as much as it had a home video and HBO and whatever other channels would play it. Kind of similar to Soul Man, where a teenage played very adult-like young lady wants a summer internship for a newspaper, and it's all revolved around writing an article that wins this contest. She writes an article, it doesn't win, she claims that it should, said that if she was a guy, it would get more noticed. She then tests her hypothesis by going to another school as a guy and fools everybody, submits her article, and the article gets turned down there too. She then doesn't know what to do. What I love is they never say what her article was about. They just said, like, your writing's good, it's the article that sucks. And in search of a new subject, she then is pursuing writing about what her experience is being a man at this other high school. She befriends a guy named Rick. He's kind of a dork, a low-key dork, but he's like a diamond in the rough of handsome guy. She has a younger brother who is aware of all of this, and he's super horny and is technically a virgin, keeps talking about how he's had sex, he just wants to try it with another person. Their adversaries are William Zabka, most known as Johnny from Cobra Kai, but this was his other movie where he played the heavy. So it's another one of these stories kind of similar to Soul Man, where the main character is either trying to get something or in pursuit of something, and does so by portraying themselves as something other than themselves. In this case, it's being a male. The things that seem problematic in this are not as heavy. One thing that I did notice between both this movie and I rewatched Secret Admirer, how casually young adults are just regularly having sex or hooking up with or dating high school students. It's just accepted. It was the fantasy of our time. We would always say, well, if you had a hot teacher, I mean, there's a song about it. It's popular, Hot for Teacher. The adolescent male fantasy of like having a hot teacher and hooking up with her, and then watching that go from fantasy to real life, and then now turned on its head where people are just sort of like, yeah, this is appalling. These young women that are banging their high school students, and it's a weird kind of time. I'm not saying it's right, or I mean, it's definitely wrong. It's just interesting to see the perspective on all those things. I remember one of the other tropes. These movies created a genuine fear that I had of PE, because they all showered like it was in prison. They all were in showers together, naked in front of each other. And there was this movie had an emphasis on jock straps for some reason, where the coach guy's like, I do a mandatory jock inspection 3 times a week. Word to the wise, and throws a jock in her face. Wear it. And it's just the grossest shit. But I rewatched the fuck out of this movie. It has some funny scenes. I don't think it's any more or less funnier than Soul Man. The thing being, the payoff to this movie, Secret Admirer, and some of these other movies, that were R. I don't know if just one of the guys was R, because some PGs snuck through with it, but the payoff, in my mind, was getting to see the main character's titties. Because in the big reveal, when she kisses Rick at the prom and reveals that she's actually a woman, he doesn't believe her. He just says, "Oh, you're gay. It's it's okay, whatever." And it was funny. Rick, so progressive, 80s guy, is saying like, "Hey, I get it. You're gay," and he's not bothered by it. He's not sitting like, "Oh, no, I can't talk." He's like, "Hey, man, it's cool. Like, whatever." She's like, "I'm not gay. No, I'm a woman," and that's what pisses him off more. Wait, are those what I think they are? Where do you get off having tits? And they're great tits too. I'd be like, "Hey, I don't believe you. Show me again. I need to see more." More proof of this.
Once again, more tolerant times.
Could be. I don't know. There was a cuteness to it that I watched, and it wasn't solely for the tits. It was a hangout movie. Like, I'm hanging out watching this gender bending of it all. It is very female centric. This was one of those few movies where me and my sister could watch it together. I enjoyed it thoroughly. She enjoyed it because we agreed on very few movies. This was one of those movies where, what do you want to watch? Let's watch just one of the guys again, and she'd be on board. All right, thoughts? Fuckers. Merely Jason, say something. Fuck.
I like this movie. I always did. I think the highlight of the film, though, is probably the younger brother. He's the funniest character, I think, in the movie. Even though, like, everything that he teaches her about how to be a guy, like, I didn't understand any of it. I couldn't relate to any of it. He says, guys take up space. Like, that's, like, the only actual good advice for how to be a guy that he gives her. Because, like, the walking and then all the posing and shit was just absolutely ridiculous. And then the shift, the grabbing the crotch and then, like, kind of that motion, none of that made any sense to me. I didn't get any of it.
Gotta get inside.
Yeah.
Dig a little. Let some air in. Move things around.
All that stuff. Silly. But I think that out of all of these movies, this one is the least misogynistic, which is kind of a plus.
It's funny you bring that up because that was actually one of the reasons why I chose it. Was the first shot in the movie. This is 80s, again, it's an 80s approach to it. It's just like how, this was the 80s solution to race relations was Soul Man. This was the 80s comedy solution to the gender imbalance. And the opening shot of just one of the guys is a lurid shot of her in her underwear as she's sleeping in her bed. Like, as if Rod Stewart, in Infatuation is doing the camera work for the movie. And so that's why I'm like, oh yeah, I'm doing this movie. Thinks it has its heart in the right place, and from the first shot, I'm like, no, it doesn't.
You got to emphasize that she's a pretty lady with a nice figure,
Mm-hmm. Before you can even take her seriously. I mean, that's the irony of the whole movie, right? Is that no one's taking her seriously because she's a hot chick.
But I mean, I never really bought her like passing for a dude,
I mean, we live in times today that are way more androgynous with young people. She doesn't look a far cry from Ralph Macchio. I think knowing that she's a girl would be tougher. You have no way of really knowing if you would have bought her as a dude.
Yeah, the fact that she was going for like macho tough guy though really didn't come.
I don't think she was going for much. I thought it was more like Joe from Facts of Life angle, because like her and I remember Pamela Adlon when she was a kid. She was very tomboyish, and that's kind of what she looked like, was just like a tomboy dude. But yeah, so you liked it, huh?
I watched it a bunch when I was younger, yeah. I haven't seen it in a long time, though.
Well, it's on Tubi. Nathan Nation.
Yeah, I watched this a couple of days ago. I think of all these movies, this is the one I've seen the least. I've probably seen it once before, many, many, many years ago. I don't know if I care for this one particularly. I had more fun just looking, like hitting pause and trying to see what bands she had posters for on her wall. You mentioned Rod Stewart. She had a big Rod Stewart poster on her wall. She had a U2 poster. She had a lot of Bruce, what's his name? The Boss. She had a lot of that shit, which wasn't so cool. But this movie didn't seem offensive to me in a way that maybe some of these other movies seemed offensive. It did sort of have that trope that you were sort of talking about where there's an adult dating someone who's younger, but I feel like that's a trope from these 80s movies where like a high school student is dating a college guy. Like that wasn't seen as something bad back then. That was like, ooh, she's kind of a mature high schooler who's ready to move on, and she's cool because she dates a college dude who's kind of a prick to her and all that. Overall, none of it really stood out to me as being problematic all that much. My wife was the one that remembered the titties at the end. I completely didn't even remember that. She came into the room and sat down with me because she wanted to see the tits at the end. So,
Wife knows good rack.
yeah.
There was some jive talk too in this. That's one thing. Just one of the guys made sure of to avoid any of your guys' awareness, your wokeness. I don't think there's any main black characters in this movie whatsoever.
I think I speak for Jason when I say thank God.
I think there might be a minority or two, like in the background. The second newspaper teacher was, I think, Hispanic, so they threw in a token minority or two.
There is some jive talk though when the brother's giving her male lessons. He's doing some talking. She then responds with some talking, and it's clearly some jive, as if it's like that's how dudes try to act.
We should do a spin-off podcast called Jive Patrol. Where we just like comb the archives of Hollywood and just like find white people who are talking back.
I was sitting there, I'm like, oh, she's doing every bit what fucking Anthony Michael Hall's doing in Weird Science. So, all right, so Nathan didn't like it, but hey, should have caught it back in the day, man. It's a sweet.
Of all these films, it's my least favorite. I thought it was okay.
She didn't go on to much. She was in a few things since this movie. This is pretty much the peak of her acting career, and I remember seeing her pop up in an episode of Freddy's Nightmares years later, and I was like, that's Just One of the Guys trick, and she's like the main character, still gorgeous. I thought she did a good job in this movie, and kind of like the news article, didn't get her much afterwards, so weird. Spoolie D.
Like Jason, I've seen this movie a bunch of times. I think the first time I saw it was at Michael Endo's house. I don't know if anyone remembers the great Michael Endo. When you're like a little kid, you just like can hang out with people like you've never hung out with before, and you just like hang out with them like a lot for like a really like 2 month period of time, and then never hang out with them again. That was me and Michael Endo. Played a lot of Double Dribble and watched Just One of the Guys a couple times. And my favorite part about it, the bullies. First of all, the fact that before he's gonna do some bully shit, he's got to fucking strap on the weightlifting gloves. That was great. He had to like suit up. And then after he bullied you, he had to be like extra dickish and say no pain, no gain, as if it's like, this is good for you. So I like that aspect of it, especially because, he was the bully and everything. He was the prototype.
Yeah, he set the standard for your 80s antagonist.
I like how he kind of broadened his bully with the gloves and the catchphrase. That was pretty cool. And then the other thing I thought was interesting about the movie is, I think we can all agree that it was super fucked up what she did to Gary,
Gary, like, Rick was the guy that she befriended. So.
Yeah, that guy. That was super fucked up because, like, not only was she like a narcissist, right? She's like, oh, my writing couldn't suck. It must be because I'm hot. It couldn't be that I have a bad quality. No, they think my other good quality is not a good quality because of my other really good quality. Like, what a fucking narcissist. And then she just like goes on to gaslight this poor fucker. And then she tries to fuck him. Like, I don't know, man.
She didn't try to fuck him. She admitted that she was in love with him. That's not trying to fuck,
Why would anyone ever tell someone that they love them if they weren't trying to fuck them?
I mean, she wasn't saying it like, here, take me now at the prom. It wasn't.
No, just here, look at my bare tits.
Eventually, she wanted to hook up with him. There were steps. She was taking the proper steppage. It'd be difficult, like any of you, just kind of were like, Dave... like it would flip your wig a little bit, There was one other part. Sherilyn Fenn playing a girl who takes a great interest in the main character as a dude.
Because he's foxy, quote unquote.
Yeah, she's the one that points out that she looks like Ralph Macchio in The Karate Kid and dresses like Elvis Costello. They go on a double date with Rick, and she says she's bringing a date for him, and her date for him was her cousin who's in 6th grade.
Right, that was fucking funny.
It's just awkward as fuck. And also because all these movies were populated with 20-something adults primarily playing teenagers. If anything, the girl who played the 6th grader was probably, high school age. It was an innocent joke, and of course Rick acted appropriately and said, hey, this is wrong.
Right, Rick was a great guy, unlike Terry, who was a fucking monster.
Well, except he liked James Brown.
He'd way better fucking taste in music than her, too.
Pretty sure James Brown would have hooked up with a 6th grader, maybe back in the day.
Well, he's got ants in his pants. Mm-hmm. What do you expect?
All right, so I think we've ran the gamut on all the problematic movies.
Can we give honorable mention to non-consensual blowjobs in 1980s movies? Specifically Police Academy, with Commandant Lassard getting blown while giving a speech, and Ghostbusters, which is a family film where Dan Aykroyd's character gets blown by a fucking ghost. It's just wild. His belt is undone mysteriously, and he gets his cock sucked, and he crosses his eyes to indicate he's nutting, I guess. I don't know. Shit that would never pop up in a family movie now.
Non-consensual blowjobs. Well, they didn't pull out. Lassard didn't go like, hey, he kept giving speeches. So, I mean, you'd think if you got one blowjob, like, could I not have a podium? I think he was doing it on purpose, just be like, oh, I hope my speech goes as good as last time.
Dave, was that the same actor as the dad on Punky Brewster?
Yeah, George Gaines, man.
This is like Dave's superpower. Like, I don't recognize people I've met. He knows every single freaking actor.
I know what I liked, and I know what I watched a lot of, so... Yeah, he'd been around. Not to be confused with Richard, what was his last name? The head counselor in Meatballs 2.
Is that the one with the alien?
Yeah. George Gaines would get mixed up with this guy, Richard something or other. His last name was with an M, because they both were older actors with salt and pepper hair. And most likely also got confused with Conrad Bain, the dad from Different Strokes. Like, they all were the older actors playing, dads or... dad figures to kids in TV shows and movies and stuff. So
I always use Conrad Bain as a metaphor for men's hairstyles that are bigger side to side than they are up and down. He had the worst fucking hair during Different Strokes.
He just had a lot of head, man. I mean, I got a lot of head too these days. So, all right, moving on. Well, we got our song 39. What is it? 39?
39 by Design.
39 by Design from Drab Majesty, courtesy of merely Jason. Jason, give us the background on this song.
I guess I'll start with the very basics. Drab Majesty, at this point, was a solo act. It was a guy named Andrew Klinko. He was in a band called Marriages, that he was the drummer, and he decided he wanted to start to learn how to play guitar, so he started playing guitar, recorded some demos, listened to the demos that he'd written, and felt like somebody else had composed them. So instead of going out as Andrew Klinko, he decided to create this persona, this androgynous alien known as Deb Demure, and they called the band Drab Majesty, based on, after his grandmother had died, he found some clothing in her attic that he would wear on stage as part of his act. And he felt like the clothes were majestic, but of course drab, because they were just old clothes he found in an attic. So hence the name Drab Majesty. Initially, at least, he was very inspired by UFO cults from Southern California primarily, that he would see on public access television. Like, a lot of his aesthetic comes out of that. Obviously, he's obsessed with 80s music, because this is probably the most authentic sounding post-punk worship kind of music that I've ever heard. But at the time that I first heard this, I had a really dim view of bands that just sound like old shit. They can be inspired by stuff, sure, but they really ought to try to put their own spin on it. Whereas this music, if I didn't know that it was actually contemporary, I would assume that it was from the 80s, because everything about the sound is so old school sounding to me.
When is it from?
This particular song came out in, I think, like 2013.
Oh shit. Wow, I never would have guessed that.
It might be a little later than that. It might be 2017.
Wow.
I'm looking at the lyrics right now. It's 2017.
Yeah, 2017. When this came out, I was so obsessed with it that, I mean, this album was like on loop, basically. Like, I would be listening to this multiple times a day. This particular song is kind of downbeat, but the album itself is mostly pretty downbeat. But then when you get close to the end, there's a song called Kissing the Ground that is a lot more aggressive, and that kind of unlocked my appreciation of everything that was going on. But this particular song, 39 by Design, well, the album that it comes from, The Demonstration, the whole album is a concept album about Heaven's Gate, the cult group that in 97, 39 members of this cult group basically took like an overdose of drugs, put on black Nikes, and covered themselves in purple shrouds, because they thought that they were going to ascend on the evolutionary ladder and become their true alien selves and catch a ride on a spaceship that was following the Hale-Bopp comet. And so this particular song, 39 by Design, is essentially about that. The video, the image of which is behind Dave, is based on one of the videos that the leader of the cult group, Marshall Applewhite, who went by the name of Doe, recorded in preparation for them committing suicide. He recorded several videos and put them out on tapes and sent them out to various people. prior to the suicide, a videotape of testimonials from all of the members who were getting ready about how happy they were to be there and how excited they were to be taking this next step. Personally, at the time when it happened, I remember just thinking, wow, what a bunch of fucking weirdos. It's kind of influenced me greatly in how I feel about people's belief systems, their action, and the fact that they were all so clearly looking forward to it. Well, frankly, delusional kind of ideas about what the fuck is going on in the world, because I personally, but I'm an atheist and I don't really believe in heaven or life after death or anything like that. Well, but for all I know, maybe they're right. Maybe they really did transcend the human form. Caught a spaceship that was following Hellbop. I don't know. Maybe that did happen. So good for them. I don't know. I really like the song. I think it's a good tune. Nathan had some questions about whether it was cheeky or not. No, I think that he takes it very seriously, in the sense that, like he said in an interview once, somebody asked him about the costumes and the makeup. They really do come out on stage, white face paint, giant sunglasses, always white wigs of different hairstyles, often wearing robes. It's all very disconnected. It's not like they don't come out like, hey, what's up? How's it going? It's all very austere.
Come out talking jive.
Not a piece of the photo.
What's up, brother?
Yeah, they don't do that,
Trump don't want no help, Trump don't get no help.
So it's not cheeky, but basically what Andrew Klinko has said is, when you go on stage, you can be anything. So the most boring thing you could be is yourself. So that's kind of the idea behind it. It's putting on a show. So it's not necessarily cheeky, but it's not earnest, really, at the same time.
Watching the video and knowing your tastes, I was like, oh, wow, he picked a really obscure thing from the 80s. I forgot about the Heaven's Gate Association at first, so I was like, oh, this is another one of Art Lord's very Art Lordish 80s sounds. And I'm like, but yet, what's with the ham-fisted home video made video or they're trying to sell a house, and they were just like, hey, can we borrow this for really quick, and filmed all these scenes. And then the Heaven's Gate thing sprung on me, because again, I'm like, why would somebody be doing scenes not just sitting in a lawn furniture chair, but with an empty one too? And it was creative. I was still like, this is interesting, because usually this type of music commands a higher production, even if it's low production value, even by 80s standards, like Blondie with Rapture, even though they had their little artsy-fartsy kind of thing with their studio set, they still tried to present it in a way that was kind of hoity-toity. And this was deliberately using VHS-looking film. And then when I remembered the Heaven's Gate thing, I'm like, oh, now this video is way cooler. I do like their presentation with their outfits. Thoroughly convincing, because I thought it would be a group from the 80s. They've taken a lot of the Ziggy Stardust kind of thing and magnified it in 80s standards, and they have a very authentic sound. It's cool to see that. I'm more intrigued by it. It's not my thing. Whenever I hear people singing like this, I want to turn it off, and that's just me. But this is very Jason type stuff. And then to hear that it's made by a guy in 2017, that makes me even more like, oh, good. The kids are not so bad. It's so retro. Sounds so convincingly from the past that I'm actually more intrigued by it now, because we live in such a time where people are so disregarding of the past, as we're talking about with these movies right now. We talk about these 4 movies and just sort of the way people look at movies just to try and find problems with them. And then here's these younger people that are making music that's authentically, I wouldn't even say it's in tribute. They're finding their voice through these sounds that existed then, but convincingly today, so much so that I thought it was from that time. So that's pretty cool. Nathan Nation?
These days, I don't listen to a lot of music. I think since I started listening to podcasts about 12 years ago, that really sucks up the vast majority of the audio that I listen to these days. Probably only listen to music in my car on the way home from work. If my podcast ends and I have 20 minutes left on my drive, I'll play Pandora or an Apple Music channel that just shuffles artists that are similar to what I like. And this sounds like the kind of band that would be shuffled in on the stations that I listen to on Pandora. So in that context, I would dig a song like this if it came on, because it's very familiar sounding to the kind of music I've listened to over the years. When Jason sent us this, I kind of went down the wormhole and checked out who they were on Wikipedia and stuff. And that's kind of where some of my skepticism about this sort of started, because I read that they're from LA. this guy's like, we really wanted to cry. Like, he's singing in a fake British accent, basically. I think that is the beginning of where I'm sort of like, all right.
Well, this is white jive talk.
Yeah, it's like the same thing Al Jorgensen was doing with Ministry when they first started. It's like, well, if you're going to pull off this new wave stuff, you got to make it sound like you're British. The song itself, I really dig. I just don't want to ever watch the videos because it's just off-putting to me. Like the Jazz Coleman-looking makeup and like the staring like this into the camera, and there are these like Dutch angles with the moving the camera in on his face. And like sort of the self-seriousness of it all. I'm perfectly fine with it, just listening to it. I think it's a great song without the visuals. You know, just music like this to me, it just seems like novelty music. If I want to hear 80s music, I'll listen to 80s music for the most part. That being said, I thought the song was cool, though.
Wow, I still can never figure out if Nate likes something or not. All right.
I liked aspects of it, for sure.
I got that. Sounded negative, then it went to positive, then, kind of a little dabble of negative.
If you have any interest in Drab Majesty at all, he's also got a band called VR Sex that are really good. They're much more kind of synth punk version of retro-inspired music.
Your comments on the video, the video was more or less replicating a lot of shots from the actual Heaven's Gate videos.
Actually, in the end of the video, there's a clip of
from Heaven's Gate. Yeah.
An American lady talking, and that's actually one of the farewell videos from the farewell video. That's actually one of the actual members of Heaven's Gate, talking about how excited she was and how happy she was to be there and how she was looking forward to joining the Heaven's Gate away team, as they called it.
Your beef is really with Heaven's Gate, Nate, in terms of the
No, I'm finding Heaven's Gate fascinating, actually.
But you don't like their visuals. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, maybe it's his makeup. Like I said, the song is cool. I just don't like the visuals.
Yeah. All right. Well,
they were great live.
Yeah, Nate. They were great live. Why don't you just go to the show and be on your phone texting the whole time? Piss off the audience. Bully D.
Yeah, I didn't notice that chair. I haven't seen that great of a use of a flimsy chair as a video prop since Death Grips when he was sitting in that alley. It's pretty much the same band.
Oh,
right?
These dudes kick ass on Death Grips. Fuck yeah. I'll take Drab Majesty all day.
Oh, that just tells you Spoolie D's where his head's at, because there's no difference between them.
What was the guy said? Like, the most boring thing you could be on stage is yourself. No, the most boring thing you could be on the stage is this fucking song. And this song is a fucking bridge to nowhere. It starts out as like an intro to a fucking new wave song, and it never goes anywhere. It's just on a fucking loop. Oh my god, it sounds like a fucking new wave methadone clinic. It's mixed so low, all you can hear is him saying he wanted to die. That's why I was late to the fucking thing, because every time I started this song, I had to fucking turn it off. I'm like, okay, it's gotta go somewhere. Nope. 5 minutes of just a fucking new wave fucking water torture. Like wild bamboo fucking under my fingernails. Out of all the songs we have listened to outside of Battle of the Bads, this is the fucking most torturous thing. Like, of all the movies, of all the fucking things we've had to watch, this is the absolute most fucking dreadful thing I have ever listened to on this podcast. But it's all fucking copycat shit. He looks like fucking Daryl Hannah from Blade Runner just, like, got done crying for an hour, right? He's got his fucking Death Grips fucking lawn chair, and then it's just this fucking, like, rote, like, fake fucking modern rock, like, new wave fucking ripoff on a fucking loop. Like, it's horrible. Like, there's no redeeming qualities about this. Anyways.
I'm glad somebody pointed out, because it is 5.5 minutes. This is a lot of repetitive stuff. But
It sounds just like the rest of the album, too. That's, I freely admit, this song in particular is very much like the same verse being repeated over and over again, and the chorus is barely a chorus, yeah.
It was funny because I had to piece it together that this was not an 80s song, because, again, Heaven's Gate was a 90s phenomenon. I thought it was old, then realized that it's a little newer old, and then I was like, oh, it's not old at all. It's more recent, and it's, throwback shit. And they made a lot of boring shit back then, so that's why I thought the boring side of it was pretty authentically 80s.
This kind of scratches the itch that, like, if you're into rockabilly or if you liked the swing revival in the 90s, you're searching for a sound from another time kind of thing.
Like Harry Connick Jr. fucking
It's
effect.
like, it's novelty stuff, I guess,
Like second-rate stuff that, like, Donnie Darko would enjoy. In all fairness, it's a song that, at least in your case, might drive you to willingly join a suicide cult. And just play this song. That'll keep me focused and motivated on getting the fuck out of here.
Is this band still around?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever seen them live?
Yeah, I said they're good
Yes.
live.
Oh, okay, yeah.
For the whole jive conversation?
Anybody listen to what's being said on here as we're saying it? Fuck. All right.
If I ever meet these guys, I'm going to ask them to give me some skin.
Oh, gee.
I recognize that, there's issues. The reason I picked it is there are levels of interestingness to me about it. Like the fact that it's not just a throwback sound, but it sounds like the actual sound of the 80s. It's like actually it's indistinguishable from an old song. The fact that there's this Heaven's Gate connection and then they did reproduce like directly like Heaven's Gate video materials and all of that stuff I think is interesting. And then just the fact that you guys hate it so much. I
didn't hate it.
I'm the only one who hated it.
I liked the song, but not the video.
I dislike this genre altogether, and I found it more intriguing finding out that it was newer and all. This is basically the music equivalent of Jason reading one of his poems to us, and
No, that's fucking beautiful.
our responses are not going to be worthy of your intention.
As far as the lyrics go, I mean, you guys keep making fun of the, I wanted to cry and I wanted to die.
They keep making
was just
fun of it.
Nathan.
Don't lump me in with these.
That was just Nathan.
In any case, I don't know. I don't want to get into interpretations, but it sounds to me,
Get into it, Jake.
like it's somebody addressing one of the cult members and saying, like, well, you said you were looking for something more, but it seems to me like you just wanted to die. You joined this cult because you were looking for something. Well, what you're looking for is an excuse to kill yourself. That's
Pretty cut and dry, guys.
He's not saying I cried and I died. He's saying you wanted to die.
Ain't no cigars and penises in this.
Like I said, the whole, I wanted to cry, I wanted to die. That was the Mystery Science Theater's impression of Morrissey when they hauled Morrissey out of Tupperware.
I have seen in that, yeah.
They open up a giant Tupperware container and Morrissey's inside. And he's like, he wanted to cry.
Thank you. That was good selection, Jason, because it provoked a lot of responses, albeit sounding negative, but I think we learned something about ourselves today, much like an 80s movie. Episode 35 in the can. Want to thank everybody for being here. Merely Jason, the Nathan Nation, Spoolie D. I've been Mean Dave. 80s movies, not as bad as people are trying to make them out to be. Maybe check out one time. And then Drab Majesty. Check them out too. And
My phone wants them to be Dean Majesty.
Oh, Dean Majesty, which sounds like an 80s character when you think about it. And we'll be back. More irrelevant topics, more irrelevant music, and more of our irrelevant discussion. Have a good one.